Boeing hasn't won a major Chinese order since 2017. Let that sink in. That's not a decline, that's a disappearance. So, how do you lose the biggest aviation market on the planet without realizing it? Not through some dramatic collapse, not through a single catastrophic decision, but through a slow, methodical erosion. While Boeing was consumed by MAX groundings, production crises, and a machinist strike, Airbus was pulling off one of the most effective market captures in modern aviation history. It built assembly lines on Chinese soil. It embedded themselves into Chinese supply chains. It aligned with Chinese industrial policy. By the end of 2025, Airbus controlled roughly 55% of China's narrow-body market. In a single, late 2025 surge, they locked in 148 A320neo family orders from 5 Chinese entities. Boeing's response? Nothing. But here's what makes this more complicated than Boeing bad, Airbus good. There is a third player now. Comac C919 has over 1,000 orders. Production targets, not rates, are climbing, and China is developing its own engine to cut the last thread of Western dependency. So, if Airbus have already captured the market, and Comac is scaling fast, where does that leave Boeing? Can it claw back a position it spent a decade losing? Or has it already been locked out of the most important aviation markets? And here's the real question no one's asking. What if the biggest threat isn't Boeing losing China to Airbus, but both of them losing China to China? Before we examine Airbus's strategy, we need to understand exactly what's at stake here. China's aviation market isn't just huge, it's one of the biggest in the world. The domestic market accounts for roughly 90% of the country's total aviation capacity, with international flights representing the remainder. China's civil aviation traffic exceeded 770 million passengers in 2025. And here's the crucial detail. China's population still flies significantly less than their counterparts in the United States and Europe, meaning there's enormous room for additional growth. Boeing and Airbus have both estimated that China's demand for aircraft could reach between 1,575 and 1,815 wide-body jets alone over the next 2 decades. For narrow-bodies, which represents the bulk of any airline fleet, the numbers are even more staggering. This is why losing ground in China isn't just a regional setback, it's a strategic catastrophe. From 2010 to 2019, China accounted for 17% of Boeing's global deliveries. Between 2020 and 2025, China represented only about 6% of Boeing's deliveries. That's not a gradual decline, that's a steep decline. To understand Airbus's success, we first need to acknowledge Boeing's struggles, because they created the opening that the European manufacturer exploited so effectively. The 737 MAX groundings following 2 fatal crashes enabled China to attempt to exert leverage over the US on trade policy. China was among the first countries to ground the aircraft in 2019, and critically, among the last to allow it back into service. But the problems didn't stop there. Even after the MAX was ungrounded globally, Chinese regulators halted new deliveries, citing unusual concerns, including a review of batteries in newer cockpit voice recorders. Deliveries only resumed at meaningful volumes around mid-2024. Then came Boeing's production quality issues, certification delays, supplier problems, and the machinist strike that took months to resolve. Every crisis consumed management attention and resources that could have been devoted to maintaining customer relationships in China. And while Boeing fought internal fires, Airbus was playing a completely different game. Here's where things get really interesting from a competitive intelligence perspective. Airbus didn't capture China through superior technology or even better aircraft. Politics did. In 2008, Airbus opened a final assembly line in Tianjin, the first outside Europe. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a calculated move to ensure that its assembly lines would not be susceptible to trade conflicts. By late 2025, Airbus had delivered its 800th aircraft, assembled in Tianjin, and it didn't stop there. A second final assembly line opened in Tianjin and is expected to be fully operational by early 2026. Boeing, by contrast, has no local assembly capability in China, only a 737 completion and delivery center. Every aircraft arrives as an American import, subject to trade tensions and tariff disputes. This structural difference became particularly consequential as US-China relations deteriorated. Now, I should add here that commercial aviation has always been intertwined with geopolitics, but the current environment has amplified this dynamic considerably. As US-China trade tensions escalated, Airbus benefited from being a European entity rather than an American one. The European Union maintains a different relationship with China than the United States does, and Airbus has positioned itself to capitalize on this distinction. When Chinese regulators created obstacles for Boeing deliveries, they were simultaneously welcoming Airbus aircraft. It's a position that Airbus GEO, Guillaume Faury, has navigated carefully. In January 2026, he cautioned about significant geopolitical, logistical, and financial risks from US-China trade tensions, while urging adaptation and self-reliance. But here's the crucial point. Airbus's warnings about geopolitical risk came after it had already captured the dominant market position. Boeing was even forced to remarket up to 50 jets originally destined for Chinese carriers due to escalating tariffs in 2025. That's not just lost revenue, it's inventory that needs homes, tying up capital and production capacity. But wait, you might say, doesn't China have its own aircraft manufacturer now? Won't Comac C919 eventually displace both Western manufacturers? That is where things get more nuanced. Comac C919. It's indeed made significant progress. The aircraft has allegedly accumulated over 1,000 orders and commitments, with around 38 jets in service as of early 2026. Comac aims to produce even more jets by the end of the decade. However, and this is important, Comac still only represents well under 1% of the global fleet. Its benchmarking on deployment efficiency remains below both Airbus and Boeing. And critically, the C919 lacks FAA or EASA certification, basically limiting it to China-based operations. There's another constraint that few outside the industry fully appreciate. Comac remains dependent on Western engines. The C919 uses CFM International LEAP 1C engines, produced by a joint venture between General Electric and Safran. China is developing its own CJ1000A engine as an alternative, but it remains years away from service. Even when it arrives, it'll face significant challenges improving its reliability and efficiency against Western competitors with decades of operational experience. The reality is that China needs aircraft now, and it needs them in quantities that Comac cannot yet deliver. That creates a window, and Airbus is filling it aggressively. And that's where we need to talk about production capacity, because this is another area where Airbus has built significant advantages. Airbus delivered 793 aircraft in 2025, its highest since 2019. Despite supply chain bottlenecks, its backlog exceeds 9,878 planes. The company is working toward A320neo production of 75 units per month by 2027, now adjusted to between 70 and 75. The A320 backlog is the largest in commercial aviation, and those Chinese orders, they're feeding directly into that production machine, creating visibility and stability that helps Airbus plan years into the future. Boeing, meanwhile, is still working to substantially increase 737 MAX production rates while simultaneously managing 737 MAX 7, 737 MAX 8, and 777X certification delays. Let's look specifically at what happened in late 2025, because these orders illustrate Airbus's strategy in action. Air China ordered 60 A320 family aircraft. Spring Airlines and Junyao Air combined for 55 units. China Express Airlines added 3. China Aircraft Leasing Group committed to 30. That's 148 aircraft in a single surge. Now, here's the competitive intelligence angle. These weren't opportunistic purchases, they were strategic commitments that locked in production slots. Chinese airlines placing large orders with Airbus are essentially declaring which manufacturer they trust for their fleet future. This is how market capture works. not through a single dramatic victory, but through accumulated decisions that compound over time. So, what exactly did Boeing miss while this was happening? Boeing may have relied too heavily on the assumption that US-China commercial ties would remain stable. When they didn't, the company had no local infrastructure to fall back on. Second, Boeing became consumed by internal crises at exactly the wrong moment. The 737 MAX disasters, quality issues, labor disputes, and certification delays all demanded management attention that could have been devoted to customer relationships. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Boeing appears to have underestimated how long Chinese regulators would maintain skepticism toward its products. The extended MAX grounding and subsequent delivery delays created space that Airbus exploited methodically. Some analysts suggest Boeing's troubles in China have political dimensions beyond pure commercial considerations. Whether or not that's true, the practical effect is the same. Now, having said all of that, Airbus's position isn't without risks. Reliance on China creates vulnerability. If Comac successfully scales production and Chinese carriers shift toward domestic aircraft, Airbus's market share could erode. There's also the question of how US-EU tensions might evolve. If Washington pressures European allies on technology or trade relationships with China, Airbus could find itself caught between competing interests. And Comac's ambitions extend beyond China. The company is targeting Southeast Asia and Western markets, though international certifications from EASA and FAA are still lacking. Comac is also developing the wide-body C929 as part of its expansion strategy. If Comac achieves international certification, or if Chinese certification gains broader acceptance, the competitive landscape could shift dramatically. What can we learn from Airbus's success in China? First, market capture is often invisible until it's complete. While attention focused on Boeing's headline crisis, Airbus was quietly accumulating orders, expanding production capacity, and deepening supplier relationships. Second, industrial policy alignment matters enormously. Airbus's local assembly capability wasn't just about cost efficiency, it was about political positioning that made the European manufacturer a more acceptable partner for Chinese industrial development. Third, timing compounds advantage. Every order Airbus wins reinforces relationships that make subsequent orders more likely. Boeing's years-long absence from major Chinese orders isn't just lost revenue, it's lost momentum that will be difficult to recover. Fourth, geopolitics and commerce are inseparable in strategic industries. Aviation has always been sensitive to international relations, but the current environment has amplified this reality. Companies that navigate political complexity successfully gain advantages that purely commercial competitors cannot match. Boeing hopes that any thaw in US-China relations could signal renewed order flow from China, but the road to recovery remains steep. Even if political barriers ease, Boeing faces years of rebuilding. It needs to demonstrate production stability, regain regulatory trust, and convince Chinese carriers that their aircraft are worth the political complexity of ordering from an American manufacturer. Meanwhile, Airbus continues executing. Its second Tianjin assembly line will increase local production capacity. Its supplier relationships with Chinese companies will deepen. Its order backlog will provide delivery visibility for years to come. And Comac will continue scaling, potentially capturing domestic market share from both Western manufacturers. The question isn't whether Boeing can recover some presence in China, it's whether it can do so before Comac becomes capable of fulfilling Chinese demand independently. That's the competitive race that matters, and right now, Boeing isn't even on the track. So, what do you think? Do you believe Boeing can recover its position in China, or has Airbus's advantage become permanent? Is Comac the real long-term threat to both Western manufacturers, or will their production and certification challenges limit their growth? Let me know in the comments below if there's a factor we've missed that could genuinely swing this analysis in a different direction. I'm particularly curious whether you think Airbus's strategy represents genuinely superior positioning, or whether it simply benefited from Boeing's position at a convenient moment. Hey, before you go, the YouTube algorithm thinks you're going to like this video next, so why not check it out?